Welcome everyone to our next panel session, looking at the role of digital technologies in the care and treatment of diabetes. My name is Alex Michaelides. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto and the Associate Vice President for International Partnerships. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this panel. We have two really exciting speakers that we'll be having a conversation with over the next 30 to 45 minutes. I'll introduce them briefly right now. First, we have Professor Hélène Millet, who is a philosopher and an anthropologist of science. Hélène has written several books, including one called Hawking Incorporated, Stephen Hawking and the Anthropology of the Knowing Subject, which just by hearing the title makes me want to go out and read it, so I will be doing that. Her new book, though, is entitled The Thinking Person's Disease, an ethnographic study of the senses. And in this book, she covers a wide range of topics from the use of technologies, but one of the particular interests in this book is the implications that human, animal, machine interactions have for our understanding of subjectivity, cognition, and human and artificial intelligence. So we'll definitely be diving into that topic as it relates to this conference. So thank you, Hélène, for being here. Our next panelist is Professor Holly Whitaman, who is the Canada Research Chair in Human-Centered Digital Health. She has a very diverse and multidisciplinary background coming from mathematics, engineering, and social sciences. She's also now appointed as well within the Faculty of Medicine. So as you can see, Holly's work is very interdisciplinary. In fact, I knew Holly when she was a trainee I won't say how many years ago, and I knew even back then she was very much a leader in the aspects of multidisciplinary research in her work. Her studies are around how to support health communication decision-making, especially how to clearly explain quantitative data and relationships between people. She also focuses on making research in healthcare more inclusive. So thank you, Holly, for being here with us this evening. So before I start into questions for our panelists, I'd like to also encourage the audience members to also ask their own questions, and you can put that into the chat window, and I will read out those questions as they come in as well. But let's get started with our first question. And this is both for Hélène and Holly, and Holly, you can go first and then Hélène. So you're both unique in terms of panel members in the way that you actually do not do research in diabetes. However, you have lived experiences with diabetes. So what I would like to ask first off is please tell us about your own lived experiences with diabetes and why you agreed to be part of today's event. Holly, can you start off, please?
Sure, thanks so much. That's a great question. And I think I would add that now I do a little bit of research in diabetes, but I didn't, especially when I was more junior, because I've lived with type 1 diabetes since I was a child. And I think it's relatively new that lived experience is recognized and valued within the academic space as a source of expertise. There always were people who recognized and valued that, but not at the academic level. And so, especially when I was a trainee, when Alex met me, when I met Alex, and in the earlier parts of my career, I was very careful to stay away from diabetes research because of the personal connection. At the point where I am now in my career, I think it's easier for me, but it's still, you know, diabetes research has a particular emotional character to it for me, being a person who lives with the condition. So it's a really interesting space to be in, but it's also, it's harder work emotionally, I would say.
Great, thank you, Holly. And Hélène? Can you answer the same
question? Thank you. Yes, of course. My experience with diabetes is through my son. My son was diagnosed when he was 2 years old. I was living in the States at the time. I was teaching at Cornell University, and I say that because it had a huge impact on my professional life. He was 2, as I mentioned, which is very difficult to manage the disease. And so as a consequence, I decided to resign my position at Cornell, and I took care of my son and became an independent researcher for 10 years. And I discovered the brutality of having a personal experience in the state as well, in a climate where you are not really protected when you have these kind of problems. But also I realized how complex this disease obviously was to manage, and how little people know about the complexity of managing this disease. And Oli knows much better than me. I'm an extension of my son, so I lived through that, but it's really a family management as well. Again, that was a big impact. And I became interested in diabetes through my own work on Stephen Hawking and notions related to disability and technology, which I can say a little more as well, but I don't know if you want to go back to that, to this point.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
We'll come back to that in some of our future questions. Thank you very much for sharing with us, both of you, lived experiences. And Holly, I want to build a bit upon your lived experience, if that's okay. And specifically, can you talk a little bit about the types of technology you use to manage your diabetes? And you know, I often see you on your Twitter feed talking about the various hacks that you need to do with some of the technologies or devices that you're using. So can you also talk a little bit about that and why there's a need still for you to be hacking your own solutions together in this area?
Sure. So I currently use one of the do-it-yourself artificial pancreas systems. The one I use is called Loop. There are 3 main systems. It's an open source, community-led intervention. And basically what I have is I have an old insulin pump that I sourced on the black market through the community of people with diabetes. I have a Dexcom sensor, which is a continuous glucose monitoring system. And I have software that lives on my phone that I basically copied and then compiled on my phone and installed on my phone so that it runs it's the brain of the system. And I think the reason that I do that is for both access issues. So there are more and more advanced technologies available. They aren't always available in Canada. And even when they are available in Canada, they aren't necessarily very affordable. And that is something, it's something that I talk about when I talk about this. I'm at a position in my life now where certain things are affordable, that I can make it work. I don't, even being a professor, we don't have the best insurance, the best extended health insurance here. So there are certain things that are just out of reach for me right now. But there are people who are in far worse situations than I'm in. And so that issue of being able to access the things that you need in order to manage this condition is a massive issue right now.
Great, thank you, Holly. It's interesting to hear about there's being a black market for people with diabetes, and I suspect for many other diseases as well. That many people go that same route. Helen, the next question is for you. So looking at your research and some of your publications, and specifically your most recent book, you actually work with systems that are far more complex than digital technologies, and specifically I'm referring to dogs and animals. Can you talk a little bit about this research you're doing? And I understand you maybe have some slides that you can also show us some examples of these things.
Yes. I need to share my screen. This is the technology I'm working on at the moment. And so I'm, as you mentioned, my research is based on different groups. I'm doing, as an anthropologist of science and technology, I'm interested in doing an ethnography of different groups. So one is the biohackers. The other one is hackers, people like Holly, who is working with Loop or this kind of devices or artificial pancreases. And the other one is the dogs. And I discovered a facility in California called D4D, which is at the origin of this new invention, this new management tool. And I became completely fascinated by that, by the idea that this dog was able to recognize a low blood sugar episode 20 minutes before any machines on the planet. And so my questions was precisely how is it possible? And we have this assumption that it's just about smelling the scent, but obviously it's much more complicated than that. And so I spent almost 1 year now following, observing, looking at how these dogs were trained. And what it means actually is to suddenly realize that we are not alone on this planet, obviously, and that you have beings that have an amazing intelligence and capacities. They have billions more receptors and capacity to smell than we do. So it's based on that, but it's also based on certain algorithms that are designed in this facility to teach them how to recognize and to make a distinction between low blood sugar and a normal scent of someone who doesn't have a low blood sugar. So I could go into details, but I don't know how long we have. I can show you. I'm sorry, I have to go very quickly because you know that obviously a lot of dogs are now already used as a kind of prosthesis. That I love this one because it's a dog which recognizes bed bugs in hotels in San Francisco, and they are trained to do that. But obviously we have as well these dogs who are able, I show this picture because they say that they are able to recognize a spoonful of sugar in 2 Olympic swimming pools, which is absolutely fascinating. And they are what I call ultimate anthropologists, which is they are constantly observing what we are doing, what we want, and they are able to as well recognize certain patterns that you develop when you have a low blood sugar. I don't know how long I have and if I can go into that or we have more questions.
No, you can take another minute or two. We have time.
And so this facility, again, what interests me as an anthropologist of science and technology, it's based on very scientific methods that they have developed, certain protocols. Again, the complexity is to be able, as you know, when you have diabetes, it's very hard to know when you have a low blood sugar or high blood sugar. It's manifests differently, it's very individualized. And so the flexibility of this management tool is to be able to recognize the low blood sugar. So you can see how the scent is taken on people with a very specific protocol. So it's a 70 when you have below 70, and it's frozen and kept in fridge. And and there are a lot of protocols obviously linked to make sure that you clean all the devices that are going to be used with this scent. And then you can see how, I'm going to be relatively quickly, but here is the room where you can see you have 5 different buckets and they are going to work and try to recognize the scent. So I'm going to show you a very quick video to give you a sense of what's happening. So as you can see, the dog recognized, and what the dog just did is extremely complicated to do, which is to follow a pattern. And so you have to train the dog to recognize this pattern, and you can see that the dog found the solution. And again, how the trainer work with them is really a new way of communicating with another species, which implies as well to create a kind of language to be able to communicate with them. So I don't know if I stop or if I
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Ellen.
Yeah.
You can stop sharing your screen
Okay.
for us.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. That was really fascinating. You know, I'm just thinking about, you know, the role that animals have been playing more in health research, and it's just incredible in terms of what's happening right there. So the next question again will be for both of you, but we'll start with Holly. And, you know, returning more to quote unquote traditional digital technologies, where are we seeing digital technologies playing a role in diabetes management? And Holly, I know you're an HCI researcher, so let's talk a little bit about, where these technologies may be the most effective, but perhaps more importantly, where are these technologies failing?
Yeah, I think, so we see, I spoke a little bit about the system that I use. There are a number of similar systems, and we're starting to see commercial systems become available in Canada as well. So this idea of an artificial pancreas, I think, is one of the main areas in which, for people living with diabetes, that we see the effect in our lives. I think the thing, and this is amazing, I've lived with type 1 for 37 years now, and when I started, we didn't even have home blood testing. So, I tested my urine twice a day with this little test tube set, and possibly sparking my interest in science. I don't know. But, things have changed so much. And I would say there's a huge benefit to quality of life. The quality of sleep with an automated system is amazing compared to life before that. But I think, and I sort of talked about this a little bit at the beginning, these are not available to everyone. So the system that I'm using right now requires technical know-how. It requires the resources to be able to get all the different pieces. I don't have great coverage, but I do have some coverage, so that really helps. Some people don't have any coverage for this, and this is out of their reach. And so I think one of the main challenges is in access, and another big challenge would be that currently a lot of the systems aren't plug and play. You can't mix and match things. And so this desire by the companies who are developing these things to have people use their whole system and no parts from any other system is a problem. It's a problem for the people who live connected to these devices. And so I would really like to see regulatory changes to make it easier for people to make their own choices. And I would like to see coverage changes to make it financially possible for people to be able to use these devices.
Great, thank you, Holly. Helen, anything you'd like to add around this question?
I find that interesting as well, because I'm in the United States and I did a lot of interviews with people who use Loop and look at how they work with that. And obviously the coverage is probably it's not as good as it is in Canada, first of all, I think. And so it's a huge problem. But I think what they are saying is they use as well, I don't know if you are familiar with Tidepool or Night Scout, or these different platforms where people can exchange devices and have access to softwares. And so that's one aspect. I think that should be developed, maybe this notion of open source and how it moves as well the current market in the States, and especially the official artificial pancreas. So I think that's very interesting to pursue that. But I agree that it's a huge problem today.
And in the US in particular, you also have major barriers to access to insulin.
Absolutely, that's something else I'm working on now as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. And those barriers exist in Canada as well, just not at the same scale, which is
exactly.
Which always makes it hard for people in Canada, because, it's almost like, well, it's not as bad as the US, so it must be okay here. But it isn't okay here either, that people have to, that there are people living with diabetes who can't access insulin, this 100-year-old drug.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And just building on that, there's also been a series of apps and other kind of systems that can be used on your smart devices and smartphones. For example, there's an app that was developed in Toronto called BANT that allowed teenagers and adolescents to track their diabetes. What are your thoughts on the use of these types of digital technologies for the management of the disease itself? Holly, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So BANT is Joe Cafazzo and Shivani Goyal's work, and they do such great work. They've got some really interesting things. They're launching Connect T1D, which is going to be a platform for studies about type 1 diabetes, which I think is amazing. I would say the use of management apps really depends on the person. And I remember, and I will disclose that when BANT was just getting started, one of the other researchers at the center, Alex Haddad, sent me a link and was like, hey, you should check this out. And I think what I wrote back to him was, Alex, I want to spend less time thinking about diabetes, not more. So certainly the place that I was at in my life at that time, I was really resistant to the idea of an app to help me with my diabetes, which I really just want it to be, I want it to be in the background, not in the foreground of my life. So I think it sort of depends on the person and where they are in their life, and how much time do they want to give to this condition. And which I think is, yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. And then I would love to hear more about your view on this.
I think I completely agree with that. And the reason I want to call my book The Thinking Person Disease is precisely because of that, because you have to think about it constantly, and it's extremely difficult, I think, to do that. And using all these devices is a way of delegating to these machines the competence to do something for yourself. And I see that, for example, in the case of my son, who was using Claritin, I think it was Dexcom, which gives you access to all your data. And he thinks it's fabulous, actually, that it helps him a lot to manage his diabetes. You can see trend patterns. And the discourse as well of a lot of people is you don't need to see a doctor anymore. You are completely in charge of your disease. I don't know how much it is true, but I think it's very helpful. But it means as well that all the, for example, this notion of accuracy in diabetes it's not important anymore as trending, for example. So it's a new way of thinking about your disease. So if you are, how long you are in range, for example, it's not just about one data at one point or one time. So all these questions, I think, are extremely interesting to think about, how it changes not only the way you deal with your disease. And I'm like you, as a mother with a son who had diabetes. I started with Humolog, regular, and pH, 3 different insulins, kicking at 3 different times. And now we have something, a completely different conception of how we manage the disease, obviously. So.
Thank you. And Helene, I'm going to continue along this thread with you for a moment. And no, I don't think we can be in a panel about digital technologies without bringing up artificial intelligence. It's, you know, on the mind of everyone today. How are you seeing artificial intelligence making its way into this area of diabetes management?
I think the idea of the artificial pancreas, I guess it's what we have in mind, and loop in a way is exactly, I mean, it's very close to be a complete closed loop. I had the opportunity to talk with a professor at Stanford. They are all working on this new artificial pancreas, starting to test on people. They rent Airbnbs in the Silicon Valley to look at how people use these kind of devices in real time. Obviously, you are not in a lab anymore, but you see how they are able to do that. So obviously, that would be fascinating. I think it raises a lot of questions. Some patients, one of them was telling me, I hate this idea because managing diabetes is part of my identity, and I just don't like the idea of having a machine controlling my body. I think that's one of the questions we can raise. What does it mean to trust machine? Which is also something I'm doing with my dog. What does it mean to trust a dog, which is going to alert you in case of danger? So again, a lot of ethical questions related to what it means to delegate to these machines all the competencies that you normally use to manage diabetes yourself.
Right. And over to Holly now, just around the, you know, you talked about before that early on when you're offered the opportunity to try out the new app, BANT, you said you didn't really want to think about it, and think about your diabetes. You kind of wanted the background. These days with the amount of data being collected by everything around us, it's kind of hard to do that. So what are your thoughts about the role of data and big data in diabetes management? Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Can I say both? I think it can be a good thing.
One with your professor hat on and one with your
yeah
experience hat on.
No, I think with both hats, I would say both. And I think, there's a lot of potential here. I think one of the things and one of the reasons, I talked about this at the beginning about staying out of diabetes research when I was earlier in my career. And part of that is because when you're earlier in your career, you don't have a lot of authority, you don't have a lot of power in the system yet. And so your voice doesn't carry the same amount of weight. But my feelings about it have not changed, which is that, there are people in diabetes research, in, artificial intelligence in diabetes who are there for the right reasons, in my view, who genuinely want to help people with diabetes live the way they want to live. And then there are other people who have different motivations, who are not necessarily working in service of people living with the condition. And I see some of that, especially in the big data space, where people are really geeking out about big data, and they see especially type 1, but type 2 as well, as a source of, really interesting data. And it's true, we are a source of really interesting data. But I think where my spidey sense goes up a little bit and I get a little bit concerned is when I see work being done that I think isn't being done with people living with the condition. It's work on rather than with, and that always makes me a little bit concerned. So it's not really what's being done, but it's how it's being done and with what ethic is it being done.
Right, great. And now we actually have a question from an audience member, from Sarah Linklater, and this is actually building upon, I think, this topic and directed at Holly. Sarah says, increased use of digital technology potentially means greater opportunity to share, pool, and leverage glycemia data, potentially anonymized, for purposes such as improving care, lobbying government, etc. But many patients may feel in the dark about how their data can or should be accessed, used, shared, etc. Holly, I would love your perspectives on this issue. Does more need to be done to raise awareness of this issue with the diabetes community to encourage uptake of technology and even donation/sharing of data to advance quality of diabetes care?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I think that. So, and I'll put my cards on the table. I actually have a project running in coordination, supported with by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and in coordination with Diabetes Action Canada, which is the part of the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research (SPORE) program in Canada. And so I've been involved with that network from the beginning, which is all about really working with people living with diabetes to advance research. So, and in that project, that's one of the things that we're looking at is, can people living with the condition develop research questions that then get tackled using data that comes from people with diabetes? And so I think that can be done, but I would personally worry, and I don't know of research that's been done on this. I believe Shivani and her team are looking at this. I would personally want to know who was using the data and to what ends, right? And so I don't have a problem with other people with diabetes having access to the data in partnership with researchers who can bring the technical skills to answer the questions. But I would worry about potential other uses of the data. So I think there's a ton of potential there, but I just really worry about misuse.
Great, thank you, Holly. Helen, do you want to add anything to this question?
No, I think Oli said what I think as well. I mean, in the States, I don't know how different actually it is from what you are studying in Canada. But I think it's a question that's not just related to diabetes, but mainly health issues and the medical domain, where all our data are shared in very different ways, and we don't really control what's going on.
Great. So we actually have another question from the audience, from James Elliott. And this one says, thank you and merci beaucoup, Holly and Hélène. In your view, what needs to happen from an advocacy and regulatory perspective to increase interoperability between diabetes technologies? And are there any countries doing a good job on regulation / regulation of the markets? Hélène, do you want to start and take a crack at that one?
Yeah, again, what I'm following is two groups who are really trying to destabilize the market in a way, or the ways in which we regulate these kind of devices, insulin or machines or artificial pancreas. So I do believe that we need to create more shared space. And as you can see with Loop, it completely modified the way the FDA evaluates certain devices. And now they have the new Dexcom Loop, which I call Dexcom Loop, but which is a mix of different technologies. And I'm studying as well the Open Insulin Project, again, which is about trying to offer a new model to produce and distribute insulin in a market where you have 3 big pharma companies which have the monopoly of the production of insulin. So it's again about finding ways of taking into account the voice and the practices of individuals who manage diabetes, and find ways of working with these big companies or around them to produce these devices that are absolutely vital for people to be able to live.
Thank you, Hélène. Holly, would you add anything?
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, and hi, James. I think as James knows, and Ellen probably knows, but others in the webinar may not know. So what Hélène is mentioning is basically there were parents who were sending their kids to school wearing sensors and didn't have access to the data.
Yeah,
and these parents thought, that's ridiculous. This is data. Why can't I have it? This is, my kid. I'm sending them to school. They don't have anyone at school who really understands these data. And I need to keep an eye on it. And so they essentially did. So I love the hashtag for this. It's we are not waiting.
Not waiting, yeah.
I've always loved that hashtag.
Yeah.
I think it's really it's Padlan, like it really says what it means. And I think now, as for other countries doing a good job, so I'm not an expert in regulation across countries. So the fact what I'm aware of may not be representative of the world as a whole. I would say I was very impressed with what Finland is doing with respect to this. So, I think that things are moving, not fast enough for my liking, but hopefully it will move more and more, because I mean, if we talk about wanting to help people, this is how you help people, is you provide them with more access and more choice.
So in your opinions, and what has to happen in Canada to overcome some of these barriers? Holly? Again,
regulatory procedures are not my area of expertise, but from what I understand, I would like to see Health Canada's processes be a little more streamlined. Like, I really respect the idea of, and I appreciate the idea of wanting to ensure that all safety considerations are taken into account, but at a certain point you have to balance. I think it's just kind of silly that right now there is technology available that is only available to those of us who have enough technical background and enough resources to assemble our own devices at home. You know, like this is a little ridiculous. It should not, you know, these should be available to everyone.
Great. And, you know, again, carry along this line of conversation, maybe over to Helen. You know, you talked about the Open Insulin Initiative and others. So is open source the solution to all these problems? And where is the line between, you know, safety of patients and the device being used and access when you talk about open source? So Helen, you want to take first shot at that one?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question because on one side, you could say that the ways in which the market is regulated in the States puts in danger people today. Some people don't have access to insulin and they die because of it. So I think it's a real problem. So that's why the Open Insulin Initiative decided to produce insulin and to find another way to distribute insulin, thinking that they want to follow a safe protocol as well, and now actually try to work with the FDA. But again, the idea was to say it's like if you had to pay to breathe, and I mean to have access to oxygen, it just you have to have that to be able to function. And they are trying to use different ways of looking at that form of cooperation, and even the states, in California in 2020, the states will be able maybe to manufacture drugs and distribute them. So you have different ways of thinking about it, but I do think that people are activists. It's a kind of social justice activism. They really want to make a difference. And they are trying to do something where they don't put people into danger. And I think the market at the moment put people into danger. It's not safe.
Yep.
No.
Any comments around open source?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of open source just as a philosophy. You know, so yes, I think open source has a ton to offer. I mean, obviously, I'm standing here right now a lot, you know, running my my body on open source software. So I think that yeah, I don't know what more to. I don't think there's anything more that I can say that's more powerful than that. That I am using it to keep myself alive.
Great. Well, thank you. So we have 5 minutes left, and so I'm going to ask one final question of both of you, and you can also take this opportunity to say any closing remarks. But the question is, you know, obviously we're here celebrating the 100th anniversary of the discovery of insulin. So, you know, it's going to be one of those philosophical questions. If, you know, what would Professors Banting, Best, and McLeod think of how digital technologies are currently supporting the diabetes community and, you know, beyond digital technologies themselves? Would they be happy? Would they be impressed? Would they be, well, I'll hand it over to you. Holly, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I think they would be impressed, and I think they would think they are too expensive.
Any final closing remarks from you, Holly?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for the invitation. This was really interesting, and it was amazing to meet Ellen, and wonderful to see everyone who's here. Thank you for coming.
Wonderful. Helen, your answer to that question, then closing remarks?
Oh, very, very quickly, I think they would be very impressed to see that the dogs they used to discover insulin are now used to as an alert, possible alert not to get low blood sugar. And I think also they would be very shocked to see that insulin was supposed to be accessible to the world again is now not. It's not the case. And to finish, I'm thank you again. I was very excited to meet Holly as well and to be able to share my research with you. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Helen and Holly, for being with us. Thank you to the audience and for your wonderful questions. This concludes our panel around digital technologies and diabetes.